If you've been looking into art school or even just generally existing in online art spaces, you've probably heard mixed reviews on art school and whether or not it's worth it. Well, I'm here to tell you some of the pros, cons, and even some alternatives to art school. And with an added twist, I didn't go to an actual art school. I went to a university with an art department, and I genuinely do believe that made an entire difference in my own experience of majoring in art. So stick around and let's get to it. So starting off, what is the difference between an art school and a university with an art department? One, price. Art schools, for the most part, are pretty expensive, and of course, universities can be pretty expensive as well, but there's also a lot of universities that are more on the affordable side. And I know in my case, the art schools around me were thousands of dollars more expensive than the affordable university that I ended up going to. For some, that high price point of art school just isn't worth it, which is totally understandable. And it's actually why, in my own case, I ended up going to a university rather than to the art schools I applied to. The university that I went to, I was able to pretty much cover tuition with the help of financial aid and scholarships, which wouldn't really be the case if I had gone to an art school. Second is environment, and that's pretty much true regardless of if you're applying to an art school or just a regular university. Now, based on my experience versus what I've seen from others online and stuff like that, it's, of course, when you go to an art school, the people there are going to be artists, and that can be a great experience. Now, me personally, I really enjoyed university because yes, I still got to make those artistic friends within that art department, but I also got to meet a lot of new people with a lot of different interests. I've made friends with psychology majors and business majors, and it's really interesting to see all these different people from these different backgrounds. And of course, there is this sort of general culture shock sometimes people get when going to school, going to university. And in my case, because I was going to a local university, I didn't really have to experience too much of that, which I am genuinely very thankful for. I didn't want to feel any more out of place than I was already feeling transferring to a four-year university. And that really all depends on you and what you find your personal preference is. Maybe you do want to make just art-related friends, and that's great. Or maybe you do want to expand your horizons and get to know new people with different interests in life. And of course, another part of the environment are the professors. Now, this is where we really start getting into the pros and cons. Maybe you have your own horror story of a really bad teacher or a bad professor that just left you with a really poor taste in your mouth for education. But I was really lucky in that sense. I had really amazing professors who not only encouraged me to try new things and step out of my comfort zone, but also helped me improve in areas where I was already comfortable with. They also just gave me a lot of resources, whether that was on how to find jobs after university or places to print our work, like digital work or stuff like that afterwards, or setting up websites, or even just general tips that they've learned as working artists over the years. But again, some people have poor experience with education and professors, teachers. So if that's something you're worried about, I would definitely recommend looking into whatever school you're interested in. Moving on to the first actual pro. Have you guys ever wanted to try out a new art form, a new medium, but maybe you were a little hesitant, or maybe you didn't even try it out because you weren't sure where to start? In my case, university helped a lot with that. I got to try out all new sorts of art forms like photography, ceramics, videography, printmaking, all without not really knowing any of the basics before going in. And I learned all of those, and I would like to say I exceeded in most of those with the help of a professor who guided us to know all the basics before we can move on. Or even if you aren't starting a new medium, new art form, you can still learn a lot with a medium that you're comfortable with and really improve. And I really had this experience with one of my professors who really helped me with my acrylics and introduced me to new methods that I wasn't aware of, and also helped me a lot with the actual canvas preparation that changes the way I really do my paintings today. Now, the second pro, networking. I know, scary, but besides the practical information professors give you on the actual mediums, on the actual art forms, there is a lot that they can connect you to, and that goes for the same for the peers, the people that you will be interacting with in your day-to-day school life. Whether that takes form in someone recommending you, someone letting you know about an open call or a position, or even just supporting your artistic journey, it's really helpful to have that network. I do want to clarify those connections should be natural and should not be created for the sole sake of connections. The network that I do have, and I'm very lucky to have, I made it out of mutual respect. And the third pro, and possibly my most controversial pro, are critiques. Now, hear me out. I know that this isn't the most enjoyable experience for a lot of people, and that's fair. But I also do feel that that has more to do with the actual environment rather than critiques as a practice. So for y'all who are unfamiliar with critiques, it's basically when, you're in a class, and whether that's with a final piece or maybe you guys are like mid through your project, you show your artwork to everyone, and the professor or students or both will offer critiques on your work. Something that you can improve, change, or maybe even something you're doing really well. And this is all sort of feedback that is, in the end, working to improve your piece. Now, I do understand why some people do not enjoy this process, because, again, it depends on your environment. Because while I had very constructive criticism and very thoughtful critiques, not everyone gets to experience that, and there is a fine line between critiques versus unconstructive comments. Now, I really like this process for mainly two reasons. One, how to improve. When you spend so long working on one thing, sometimes your eye just no longer picks something up. And when I was, in university, I would be spending maybe a month at a time on various pieces. And, sometimes you miss things. So sometimes people may notice things you haven't simply because it's fresh eyes, or maybe they have a different background that allows them to notice something you don't. And in some cases, you can even just learn what you're good at, and maybe you can lean a little heavily into those areas. Number two is outside perspective. If your piece has a certain meaning and you really want to make sure that meaning is being conveyed, it's really amazing to get that outside perspective from someone else who hasn't necessarily lived your life or lived that experience, and see if they get that meaning from that. Really, once you put your art out there, you can't guarantee what people will think of. So if you really want that one special meaning, it's really nice to get that feedback to see maybe what you can change, or if it is working. For example, this drawing back here, it's about my mixed feelings with my heritage. Now, when I originally presented this, it was really the chance to see whether or not that message got through. And it did. And if it isn't, that feedback will help you change or slightly adjust things to really get that meaning across. And One thing I think of in particular when it comes to critiques is that, especially in the school setting, it's really helpful once you're outside of like a university or some sort of school setting. It's really hard to really get that group of critique unless you really have like people to ask. So really, critiques is a great time to really get that feedback and how to improve your work before you actually go on to be the professional that you want to be. So moving on to some cons. Now, I've touched a little bit on some cons like the price point, the possibility of a poor environment, but I've wanted to go over some common cons that I've seen and some that I've kind of experienced. First up is schedule. Now, this is pretty much true whether or not you're interested in applying for an art school or university or whatever you intend on majoring. It's that the schedule is in fact someone else's, it's not yours. And yes, of course, you pick what classes you want and the hours those classes go, whether you want a morning class or an afternoon class. But at the end of the day, the deadlines will be set by professors. Personally, don't mind that at all. I've always been very, I guess you could say, successful in a school setting. I think I really strive in it. But sometimes schedules don't always work for everyone, especially if they have like other commitments. And when you take into consideration art classes, especially when you have like studio art classes where it's like 3 hours long, that's not always gonna be the best for everyone and their preference. Next up are foundation classes. You might be going into art school, to university, with those art basics locked down. So when you do have to go into those foundation classes that go over shape and line and value, you might find the practice a little bit redundant. Now again, I personally did not mind. Yes, I went into university with those sort of basics of art understood and practiced, but I didn't really mind it. I always figured worst case scenario, I get better at it, or worst case scenario, I'm just reinforcing the skills I already have. And another con that I see that I personally do not get, but I feel like it's a common con that I've kind of seen, especially online, is that there is a lack of creativity afterwards. Now I'm assuming because it's, you have a lot of art classes going on, and you kind of have to dedicate your all to that. And then afterwards, whether it's like during a spring or winter break, or even after university or art school has ended, you feel a lack of creativity. I personally did not experience this. While I did have some projects that maybe focused heavily on the basics, the foundational skills of art, or whether or not I had a project that I had to work within a limited scope, I never really felt a lack of creativity or like my creativity was being hindered in any sort of way. If anything, I felt like it really pushed my creativity because I had to find a way to really make that work within those restrictions. But again, I know that's not the case for everyone. I also did a lot of courses that weren't art related. Now, I know you still have to do like general education, but all of the electives I had pretty much chosen during my university, my 4 years, I always went with courses that weren't related to art, even though I could take more of those art courses as my electives. I always chose like histories or sciences or English and stuff like that. I feel like it really helped balance out my time and my energy of when I would make art and when I wouldn't. And also sometimes they would inspire each other, and in the essays I would write or in the art that I would make. And last and final con is resources. Now, this is more what I've seen and what I've experienced, much less than what I've seen from other people, and that's I think the main difference between maybe going to a university that has a more small art department versus going to an actual art school. Now, I'm not sure what's like at other art departments at other universities. I haven't been to all of them. But in my case, my university had very little like studio space. And like for the most part, smaller classrooms. Not that they were small, just on the smaller side. So let's say if you wanted to work on something like really big, it just wasn't gonna happen there. And this is just something like I've kind of noted when seeing other videos from people who are at actual art schools who have just like a bigger workspace. At the end of the day, that was not the biggest deal to me. I don't work very big, especially like when it comes to my paintings for the most part. So it wasn't something I was particularly concerned about. And again, I knew it kind of going in because the university that I went to wasn't primarily known for its art department. It was known for like engineering and it's like business majors. Maybe if you would go to a university, let's say like UCLA, that does have a more prominent art department, you might not have that same issue of space. If that's something you're interested in, look into it. Now, alternatives. So what are the alternatives to going to art school or going to a university with an art department? And there's a few different ones that I personally thought of, but of course, when you are self-taught or something along those lines, there's a lot of different ways you can go about that. Speaking in less of a self-taught method and more of a guided method, I guess you could say, or slightly school-related, but not necessarily. There are online programs which are a little bit shorter and for the most part a little bit less expensive than a typical semester. For example, there's Brainstorm Online that teaches character design, concept art, backgrounds, and those are like shorter programs, but still very much offering that same sort of school-like setting. And of course, there's always programs by actual artists or apprenticeships that, you know, it's the artist directly sort of teaching you their methods. And of course, in the more self-taught area is art books, which are extremely helpful, whether that book is covering a certain technique or whether it's even just art history books, because there's a lot that you can learn from the paintings, from the drawings of the original masters. And of course, there is always the helpful videos on YouTube. There's a lot of videos. I make some of those videos, whether you're trying to learn how to paint, how to draw. There's a lot of resources online to help you. And finally, there's also videos from artists. Now, I did put this separate from like online programs that artists offer because I do think it's a little bit different, because it's not necessarily a one-on-one kind of thing. It's more of like the artist posting a video or a breakdown of their method, and then it's like you kind of learn from that, but there is no actual interaction going on. So again, these are just some of the things that you might want to think about and consider if you are considering going to art school, if you are considering pursuing art. And simply put, the school setting isn't for everyone. Some people, like me, thrive in it. Some people don't, and they find that they are much more successful outside of the school setting, which is just as great. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys learned something. And of course, if you ever have any questions, feel free to comment them down below and I'll do my best to answer, help you guys out. I'll see you guys next week for a new video. Bye.